Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for a Learning and Growing webinar on supporting students with mental health challenges in higher education. This session is a part of our Mental Health Awareness webinar series. Our presenter today is Cailyn Green of SUNY Empire State University. My name is Sidra, and I'll be your moderator today for Hawks Learning. We will have a live Q&A session after the presentation, so please enter any questions you have into the Q&A module as we go, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end. I'll now hand it over to our presenter.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Cailyn Green. I wanted to actually, before I start my presentation, kind of thank you all for being here and spending your time doing this. Mental health awareness is something that is very important to me, not only personally, but also professionally, as that is my field of study. And it can be very daunting for people to communicate and talk about mental health issues. So by attending webinars and doing the work like this, you all were working to break down that stigma, to create an environment for people to be able to feel more comfortable in sharing their experiences and in turn reaching out for the support that they so desperately and should be able to deserve to be need. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, so to start us off, supporting mental students and mental health in higher education specifically, I want to start with, why am I qualified to talk about this? First of all, actually, Hawks reached out to me specifically and asked me to present on this topic. I've presented on topics similar to this in the past for them. So I really appreciate them reaching out to me and asking me to bring this into the conversation and have a professional discussion around it. I have been working in the clinical field for over 10 years. I'm a New York State credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor, master supervisor. I've worked with students with addiction and substance abuse issues, which also includes co-occurring, anything from anxiety, depression to schizophrenia and other mental health issues. I also have 10 years in teaching in online settings. So I'm very well versed in how to support the student body in a very unique online setting where I don't get to see my students on a daily basis. I can't recognize some of those triggers or those warnings that in-person professors get the luxury of seeing. So I've kind of had to tweak my clinical practice expertise skills to try to identify how I can support my students in an online setting. I have a strong connection to my university's wellness center. As soon as I started working at this university, I connected to them. We do a lot of wonderful work together in supporting our students at SUNY Empire State University. I've done multiple presentations on supporting mental health in that student population. And one of the most important things that I want to say before we move forward in this is we must see our students in a holistic approach. School is not their entire life, right? They have lives outside of school. They have families they care for. They have children. They may have parents they care for. They have jobs. They have other stressors, and they have mental health. We all have mental health. A scale is depending on how our mental health is on a daily basis. Are we feeling great today? Are we not feeling so hot today? So mental health is not something that is only a part of someone's life if they're struggling or dealing with it. Mental health is a part of everybody's life. Students' personal issues. Students have issues outside of the classroom. I know it's important for us to remember that it can be so easy to see, oh, our students have 4 classes. That's the most important thing in their life, because it is for us. That's the only piece that we know. But it's our job to identify that students have important things, and these things could be much more important than a test that they have with us. Right? They might have a family member who is sick, or housing issues, or car troubles. They can't get to their work on time. Those things cause stress. And school is added on to their everyday normal type of stress. At SUNY Empire, we do a lot of webinars every term to allow students to share about their other outside factors. We call these monthly connect groups. And what this does is it opens up the conversation of stress management and feeling overwhelmed. We want to make sure our students identify that they're not the only ones feeling overwhelmed. They're not the only ones struggling with balancing work and family and school and somewhat of a personal fun life as well. When the students think that they're the only ones struggling in that, this is where mental health issues can start many other ways. This is one of the ways mental health issues can start to bubble up. and they think they're all alone. So having some type of a brave space, a platform where students can connect about their mental health and about how they're handling it. Now, with this also being said, we want to make sure that our role as instructors in higher education, we are not counselors, right? And that's something that personally I've had to really work on, creating that black and white boundary of, when I am a professor in my professor role with my students and my mentees, I am not a clinician. I cannot be supporting them in a clinical manner. I can be identifying issues and referring them out to the proper and appropriate care. But it's important for us to remember our responsibility in our role, and that's for not only to protect ourselves from burnout and from backlash, but also to protect our students in getting the proper support they need from us in this role, and then helping them find the proper support in the clinical setting if they need that. We also have clubs on campus. One of our clubs is called Active Minds. It's this great student group where students can connect and dive into their own topics about mental health with academic support and guidance. And this they do on their own. So the Connect group is usually me and someone else, another professor here, who help guide the conversation and support the students. The Active Mind is a student club. They do that on their own. They can turn that into whatever they want every term, depending on who is participating in the group. But allowing your students to have that outlet where they can focus and talk freely about mental health, stressors, feeling overwhelmed, issues with not getting the proper clinical help or support, makes them feel more of a part of that community. And we know when a student feels as though they're part of the university's or college's community, they're more successful overall. And that's the overall goal here always for us. The importance of this topic. The Mayo Clinic identifies that 44% of college level students have symptoms of depression and or anxiety. These symptoms can look like difficulty, and these are the things that we as higher education professionals, instructors, administration staff, all of our wonderful team members who work together to support our students in all the different various aspects, we can be on the lookout for. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's our responsibility to identify when a student is struggling with a mental health issue. People are very, very good at hiding those symptoms, and that's part of that breaking down the stigma. People feel they have to hide the symptoms or the behaviors because they don't want people around them knowing that they're suffering, so they don't get the proper help. It's our job to have open eyes and be as vigilant as we can in our role, right? Keeping that boundary of what we can do and identifying what we don't have power over. But some signs and symptoms that we can be aware of include difficulty with schoolwork. Students have a loss of interest in activities that maybe the first half of the term, they were really engaged in the discussion board. They were active in class, raising their hands. They were, super, super engaged and active, and that kind of trails off. And then midterm, the activity and the engagement doesn't really seem to be quite there anymore. Of course, we get burnout, but those are conversations that we can have of just popping in. Hey, you seem a little off. Everything okay? Those simple investigation questions can really go a long way with someone who is currently in an anxiety episode or a depression state. If someone isn't coming to class as they regularly did for a while, and now they're missing classes intermittently, this can be a really great opportunity to shoot them an email and say, hey, I noticed you missed a couple of classes. I just want to know, is there anything I can do to help you? Here is the support system for our campus's wellness center. At the end, I'll talk about some resources that we can provide as well. But reaching out to those individuals, we all have different age range of students. So I don't like to say, kids or adults. It depends on the age range of students that we have at the different type of universities that we work at. But people in general can really, really respond well to when someone reaches out to them. And that a simple email of, hey, I see you've missed class for a couple of days here. Is everything okay? Can I help you with something? Can really bring a student back into the community. And that's what we want our universities to be, communities to support the student in that holistic approach. Changes in eating or sleeping, we may not see that. Or perhaps we notice the student always used to bring in breakfast for their 8 a.m. class, and suddenly they're not anymore. That can be a behavior shift as well. Emotional outbursts in class or emotional outbursts in open office hours with you. The sense of being overwhelmed, that they express that it's just too much going on, they can't handle it all, they feel like they're drowning. Those are all those trigger words, those key words to be aware of when someone is feeling strong sense of anxiety, possible depression episode, or just feeling of overly stressed and overwhelmed as well. um, Feelings of panic, faculty self-assessments. I have some professors who ask their students to fill out self-assessments at various points throughout the term. They want to identify how are their students feeling overall. Are their students feeling overwhelmed? And I've had professors who adjust their homework assignments because halfway through the term, the entire class says, we are overwhelmed. And it may not be just this one class, but perhaps that term you happen to have students who are taking more work than others. we you can adjust accordingly and help out with the student's holistic approach, right? By minimizing some of your heavy workload, gives them a breathing room to work on some of the other assignments that they have. Now, we're not looking to ever, uh, you know, hurt our academic integrity, of course, but we can have some flexibility with that as well if we want our students to be successful in all facets of their life. A lack of energy, or warning signs, or things you see of suicide or possible self-harm. High risk students. Certain students can be at more high risk of these symptoms. And again, this is not our place to know all of these facts, but these are just some things to be aware of, to have in the back of your mind, depending on what your student population looks like. Low income students, students of color, female students, students who identify as LGBTQ, and students who are caregivers for children or for other adults. If you find that one of your students fits into one of these categories, it can be helpful to send an email out to all your students, right? We want to be inclusive and support all of our students with possible campus resources that your campus or your online university might have. There's no harm in sending the resource out as early as possible so that a student has it safely in their email. And there's also nothing wrong with, if you see a student who hits one of these demographics, perhaps struggling a little bit more, connect with them. A simple connection can go a long way with someone who is struggling with mental health issues. Warning signs of suicide. Now, again, I know that we're not all counselors here. That is just my area of expertise. But some things that you can be, again, in the back of your mind, aware of include ignoring classwork, skipping classes, withdrawing from friends and wanting to be left alone, or giving away their possessions. These are things that we see often in the clinical world of someone who is thinking of possible taking their life or self-harm issues. So being aware of that so you can possibly support them in a way. And talking about suicide, doing riskier self-destructive things such as using drugs or driving recklessly, increasing use of alcohol or drugs, or saying goodbye to people as if they won't be seeing them. And you may never see these symptoms, but you could also perhaps have an announcement in the class about educating your student. If anyone, at this university, we support mental health the best that we can. If you know of someone who is having the symptoms of these things that I just mentioned, please talk to them. Talk to one of your professors here about it. Open that conversation, that door. Educate your students on how they can be that education and door to their peers as well. So assessment of students in online settings. Majority of my experience is teaching in an online setting. So this is also where I find that my colleagues struggle with, what can I do? I don't see my students. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know what they're saying to each other. I'm not in an in-person classroom setting. So some things that we can keep an eye out for in the online setting is look for broken patterns of regular engagement. If you have that student in the online discussion who's usually always posting on Monday morning, always responding by Tuesday afternoon, active in discussions, making multiple posts, and suddenly they disappear, or their posts are half of what they used to be, or their posts simply give a vibe of being sad or being uncomfortable with themselves, reach out, throw an email out to them. Know your school's mental health resources. Know if your school has a wellness center or a clinician on staff to connect them to. Again, it's not our role to be the counselor, but it is our responsibility as a professor or instructor or administration staff to try to connect that student to the proper resources, especially if we have a resource in our university or on campus that can act as that for that student. We can't see everything. I understand that. But we can notice if a student's grades drop dramatically, right? We're aware of the grades. That is the evidence that we have. And if a student is earning 90s, 90s, 90s in all their discussions, and suddenly they're dropping down to 50s, 40s, 60s, that can be a sign of something happening in the home. That's a break of regular behavior, right? That's a broken pattern. We want to reach out to those students and connect with them. Even if it's just if I can offer any support, let me know. But letting them know that you see something changing in them. That can be a huge outreach to a person suffering from mental health or being overly stressed. Many schools have a counseling center or an agreement with a virtual counseling facility. Know what that is. Know who that connection is at your university. Have that and a sticky note attached to your wall behind your computer so that you can refer to that whenever you need as quickly as possible. If you're an online school, what online or virtual resources does your school use? What do they utilize? Be aware of that. Make an announcement in your classes around midterms and finals week during high stress times. Create monthly announcements to encourage your students and remind the students, especially during those high stress times, hey, I know it's midterms week. You got a lot going on. I respect that. You probably have papers and tests to finish. And you also have your outside jobs or your caregiving to family members. You're not alone. Okay. Talk to your classmates. Know that you're not the only one going through that type of high level stress right now. The simple idea of knowing that you're not alone in something can create a lot of positivity and help someone identify better coping skills for themselves to work around that or work through it. Mental health resources. What at SUNY Empire State University, what we use the TELUS Health My SSP app. It's an application that we partner with. And when students come to our wellness center seeking mental health resources, we can connect them directly to this app. They can connect and find a counselor in whatever area code they live in, wherever in the country they are. They get some immediate coping mechanism supports, but it's a great resource that any professor, a professor who teaches business and has no idea about mental health, can give a student this app on their phone, and they can get connected to mental health resources as quick as that, right? This is how we support all of our academic and higher education staff members and faculty to support the students in that mental health situation. Recent situation that kind of spawned this idea as well. I was asked for a student of ours wanted to do a webinar. We love student webinars. We love that student engagement. One of our students asked to create a webinar on self-harm. So the Wellness Center reached out to me and said, hey, we have this great student. They're, straight A student, very strong student. They wanted to share information and host a webinar on self-harm. I said, I love the idea. This is great, right? Let's educate the community on what self-harm is. How do we help someone out of it? But we had to really curtail it. Okay. This student was a very strong student, but they wanted to share a lot of clinical information that they had learned from their own personal clinical experiences. In this setting, that is not appropriate, right? I don't know who's going to be coming to this webinar. I don't know their backgrounds. We cannot be giving clinical advice. And as our roles as professors, even if you are a clinician, in this role, that is not your proper place. We have to have those boundaries. So I worked a lot with the student to change their presentation. We had to adjust that we're not giving any type of clinical advice or clinical, tips or tricks that they've learned. This is an educational setting. This is how are we educating other students on what self-harm is, how to be aware of it possibly in others, and then how to connect those friends, family members, colleagues, classmates to appropriate resources where they can then get the clinical or counseling or self-help support that they need. The student gave me a little bit of pushback on it, but I explained that we have different roles and different things that we do in our lives. And even though I am a clinician in a different role, in this role I am a professor, and in this role we don't have clinicians on staff to support people if they were triggered by something, or if they told me that, oh yes, I engaged in self-harm. This is not the proper setting for that per se, right? So we had to adjust our presentation, and it ended up being a beautiful presentation. The student was very, very happy with it. The administration was very happy with it. It was a great way where we were able to really bring in a student's knowledge and a student's passion, connect it to a professor's area of expertise as well as passion, and create a great learning experience for that student as well as all the other wonderful students and faculty and staff members who attended that webinar. We have to have a safe chat about mental health. Okay, there are some do's and some don'ts in how to properly do that. We don't share personal stories. Okay, in this setting, as this professional role, this is not our place to share personal stories. We don't give clinical advice. That's not our role in this setting. We don't know our students enough of their biopsychosocial history to provide any type of clinical advice. That is not our role. We're not prepared for that at this point. We also don't want to get involved in scare tactics or horror stories. There are some self-help groups that find that works for them. That's great. We need to connect a student to groups for that purpose, but that is not our role. What we do want to do is make sure we're knowledgeable on the topic. If we're not qualified to talk about a topic, we should not be talking about it. And this is not something saying that we're less than another counselor or another faculty member, but it's a sign of strength in a faculty and professor to identify that's not my area of expertise. I should not be involved in this current situation. Let me connect you to somebody who can properly help you. Okay, we want to make sure that we focus on evidence-based best practices and trusted facts. We want to make sure that we stay general with our students and we're not giving clinical situational advice. We want to have referrals ready and on hand, knowing what your university or college referrals have, what do they have on campus, what do they have in partnerships. Have those referrals ready, know what they are to share them as soon as you can. And then we want to keep it informational and educational based, again, in this setting. We want to make sure that we're keeping those boundaries healthy and strong. And then using appropriate terms. This is an interesting topic that is kind of, I don't want to say new, but it has recently spawned some discussion, especially in the mental health and the substance use community. There are terms that are outdated. Okay, we have terms that have a negative stigma associated with them. And one of the examples that I'm currently doing some research on is the term addict. Okay, the term addict carries no positive connotation at all. It is only negative stigma attached to it. We are moving away from the term addict and moving towards the term substance abuse user. This is more about person-centered approach. A person is not their mental health diagnosis. A person is not anxiety. A person is not depression. A person is not schizophrenia, and a person is not addiction. That is a piece of their mental health and their struggle and their journey. We want to make sure that we are providing our students that safe and healthy situation where they can feel comfortable to talk to their colleagues, their faculty, their staff about issues they have without being labeled as something. So we want to be thinking about what are the terms that we're using. How can we curb that? There are words that we've used our whole life, and now, oh, we have these new words, and that can be very challenging. But when we research them and we investigate them a little bit, it becomes a little easier to start to make those changes because, again, all of you are here because you want to see those changes made. You care about mental health. You care about breaking down that stigma. These are the things that we can do in our everyday lives. And when you hear a colleague or a faculty member or a staff member use a term that has stigma associated with it, have that difficult conversation with them. Don't be afraid to tell them. I will tell you, I did this recently to somebody and I was scared. I was so scared. Oh my goodness. They used the term addict, and I went up to them and I explained that we're moving more towards a person-centered approach. And they thanked me immensely for letting them know, because they simply didn't know, right? But for us who are active in breaking down that stigma, and we want to work to make the world a more accepting place so that people feel comfortable talking about it to get the help they need. These are the things, that tangible things that we can do in everyday life to help break that stigma down. Okay. This is what we can do. I'm now going to open up to questions, comments. I would love this to be a lively, active discussion. If we have thoughts or questions on situations, please feel free to bring some of those in right now with us. I would love to dive deeper into one of these topics or any of these topics.
We have one so far. They would like to hear more advice about setting boundaries. For example, they offer assignment extensions and other forms of flexibility to support student mental health, but at some point this starts to affect my mental health, especially as not all my colleagues are doing the same thing, and that sometimes leads to my class being naturally prioritized below that of a less reasonable colleagues. In the meantime, I also wonder whether setting a hard line for deadlines might be healthier for students rather than open extensions all the time. I appreciate your help in terms of balancing how we set healthy boundaries for ourselves and for our students.
This is such an important question. And what I will promise you is you are not the only one struggling with that, 100%. But what I want you to know first is your mental health comes before anybody else's. Okay. And this is coming from a trained clinician. Okay. Your mental health comes first. If you don't have your own set of skills and ability to take care of yourself and focus on yourself, we can't take care of anybody else. So that is number one. If the flexibility is too much for you, then you got to reel that in. You need to focus on what do you need to do first for yourself. Having the flexibility is fabulous and the students appreciate it, but there also can be that boundary of we have deadlines. Maybe make an announcement that this class contains deadlines. Those deadlines are hard for those deadlines are, I like to say, are what's the word that I use? Oh my goodness, not concrete, like clay. They're hard. They're hard deadlines, but we can move them if we need to for emergencies. Okay. So you have something in your syllabus saying we have hard deadlines. If we have a medical or a personal emergency, please be prepared to provide proper documentation of said emergency. It is your responsibility to reach out to me directly to communicate this, and then we can communicate a plan moving forward. I also have some professors who prefer to keep things very lenient because it makes them happy as well as their students, but you have to find what works best for you. That is number one. If you don't have something that works for you, if it doesn't work for you, it's not going to work for your students either. So again, put yourself first. We always have to put ourselves first. I have a couple of questions in the chat that I'll go back to the Q&A. You guys are wonderful questions. Oh my goodness, this is fantastic. Should we share our own experiences with depression or anxiety? This would really depend on the situation. Okay. If you are a trained clinician in a clinical setting, that can be a wonderful way to gain trust with your clients or your group participants. If you're in an educational setting as a professor, I would steer away from that. That is not your especially if it's not your area of expertise. Okay. Sharing stories or horror stories about what you've been through in an introductory level can be helpful, but you also don't want a student to be connecting to just you on that, as you are not their primary source of clinical support. You may offer, hey, I've been there. I've been through that. I get what you're going through. Let me connect you to someone who can provide the proper support, showing that they're not alone, showing that you identify with them, but at the same time, not crossing that boundary and then providing them with the proper support. Instead of the use of the word addict, we use a substance use abuser or a substance user. Thank you. Wonderful. Appreciate you clarifying for that. I'm in a workplace where faculty are under so much stress that they tend to take things personally and react very strongly. You're not alone. That is unfortunate. That is a big piece of higher academia. Absolutely. In short, communication about changing behaviors is seemingly impossible. How would you initiate a department conversation to get past this clear faculty mental health barrier, or even talking about mental health of our students? Great question. I am part of a group on my university, in my online university, where we have, they're called open mics. And this is a wonderful platform that we have once a month or once every 2 weeks, depending on how we feel the need is fit. And we have the open mics. There's no department deans. The department chairs are welcomed on, but the department chairs are welcomed on for the sake of being part of the conversation, not as their role as a department chair. So that has to be made very clear as well. And then someone facilitates the group to talk about, this is an open space. The conversations that we have here stays here, but this is an open mic platform for us to share how we're feeling overwhelmed, how we're coping with it, how we're dealing with it, or how are we not dealing with it? How is it impacting us? Let each other hear what you're going through, what you're dealing with, and share things that do work for you. You'd be very surprised what might work for you, someone else had never thought of, and they try it and they feel so much better. So really it's talking and sharing, but having open mics, whether it's in person or virtually, I have found them to be immensely, immensely helpful. Firm due dates. I like that word. Yeah, the word firm. Firm is, it's there, it's strong. We have some flexibility in that as well, right? But some faculty find that if I use the word flexible, students take advantage of it. And that's, we don't want to blame students for that, but also a bit of the reality, right? So soft deadlines, I love that. I'm a celebrate recovery leader, and the term addict is used more of a generalization of unhealthy habits, not just substance abuse. Yep, and some people are not willing to speak specifically what the habit is. Absolutely. And in that same thought, if an individual student or a person uses that term as part of their personal recovery journey, that's fantastic. That is their place to use that term if that's part of their recovery journey. Just as someone, I have a client say, I identify, I'm a schizophrenic. And I go, if that's part of your healing journey, wonderful. I will never label you as a schizophrenic. As a clinician or a professor, you are more to that to me. So I identify you as someone with substance use issues or someone with schizophrenia. But that's a very personal choice too for that person. Let's see what questions we have. Okay. I like advice on tutoring students with mental health concerns. That's wonderful. Are we talking about tutoring for mental health concerns, or are we talking about tutoring on like math and students have mental health issues and that they're dealing with? Those two very different things. So if you clarify that, I would love to jump in on that. How do you deal with learning disorders and making instrumental? So this is where our fabulous disability accommodation center comes in. Okay, we need to be directing our students to our campus's disability accommodations, student support services. They need to work directly with that office. That is how they get their proper accommodations, and then you work within those legal platform of those the formal accommodations. If your school doesn't have a disability accommodation office, talk to someone about that, right? Our students come in all shapes and forms with different type of abilities or disabilities. We want to make sure that we're supporting them in every possible way. Especially for faculty and disciplines unrelated to social behavioral sciences, what advice can you provide to them by helping students? If someone doesn't feel that they have knowledge, expertise to talk with the student in a positive way, how would you recommend they respond to a student coming to them for help? Fabulous question. This is going to apply to every faculty member outside of human service field, right? Absolutely. This is where we do those warm handoffs. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got a lot of depression going on, I'm really not feeling so great, I'm having some issues, and you go, I'm not qualified for this, but I know who you can talk to. I'm going to bring you down to student service. I'm going to bring you down to the wellness center. I'm going to email you and directly the student services center on the same email. So even if I can't bring someone personally to the office, I'm creating that warm handoff via the email situation. And then follow up. A week later, response to the email, hey, I'm wondering how you are. How did you get a chance to connect to the wellness center? What was their advice for you? Keeping that warm handoff live can really provide a lot of support. And I'm going through these questions. If I'm missing some, I'm so sorry. There's just so many coming in. This is so wonderful. Sometimes when I know a student is going through something, I may offer for them to do something later, but sometimes they prefer to stay and do the work, even if the outcome might suffer. Should I insist or go with what they tell me? We have to respect the student, right? We have to respect what the student wishes to do. They may just think of putting this test off now creates stress for me in the future. I'd rather get it over with and be done with it. And that's their choice. Okay. If you find that they're suffering grade wise throughout the term and you go, you know what, I would like to offer the student maybe perhaps a redo of something, that's your prerogative as a professor of that class. But that's a great question because you're offering the option. They're not taking it, but they may just see that as more stress building up for more future work. So that, that a way to reframe that. Are the symptoms we should keep an eye out for open eyes, just depression? What are some other key parts of mental health? What are some other symptoms, other big areas such as anxiety? The feeling being overwhelmed, the feeling of students missing things. Do some research yourself on this. Google is wonderful on this. We actually recently had a conversation in my School of Human Services of, is having too much mental health information out there hurting some people, right? Is the idea that now we're diagnosing ourselves? Are we creating mental health symptoms? But take the opportunity to research some of this. Don't be fearful of it. Okay. Research symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of being overwhelmed, and then take a look for those things in your students. Have an open conversation with your students, especially if you know you teach a content that is stressful. And we know there are some classes out there that are more stressful than others, right? Let's be real here. Talk to them about it. Invite your wellness center counselor to come in for a quick 30-minute chat. If you have a class that you think or students get very stressed out about, invite them in and invite a counselor in, invite the wellness center student support services in to tell the class from their expertise, hey, we have a wellness center. Your teacher has brought us in because they know this class can end up being a lot and they want you to prepare yourself for this. Do you have any advice on how to encourage upper administration to better fund counseling and services for students struggling with mental health? I refer students to the center. When I follow up with the student, they tell me they're not able to get assistance because of the lack of available counselors. Great question. Do surveys. Do a Survey Monkey. Get all your faculty to be part of the Survey Monkey. Send it to all your students. Get information on what students are feeling. Asking that Survey Monkey or whatever you use. I'm not promoting Survey Monkey. It's just coming to my mind. Do you experience symptoms of anxiety? Do you experience symptoms of depression? Do you find yourself engaging in risky behavior such as drinking or smoking excessively, driving recklessly, engaging in promiscuous sexual behavior? Ask those questions in the survey. Send it out to all your students that you can. Get that data back. Give it to your counseling center. Say, hey, this is what our students are dealing with. Are you prepared to support them in that? When you have that data, we're able to provide the data to get the resources, but someone has to collect the data. And that's where the work comes in, right? You guys are all here because you want the work done, but now we have to do the work. Piggybacking on the boundary question, how far can I go to make sure the student is okay? For example, I had a student who had suicidal ideation, and I reported it to our students counseling center. I haven't heard back from the student or the center besides that they got in touch. How far can I go to make sure to check in the student's doing okay? This is a very difficult question, and I'm so glad you asked that. You can email them. If you have the student's phone number as part of your, I'm not saying go find the phone number. If part of your university is that you get your students' phone numbers on the rosters, you can call them, absolutely. But in that same sense, you're not their clinician. You can check up on them, asking if they're doing okay. But if they're not answering your emails and they're not answering your phone calls, there also has to be a time that you step away, right? Because that is not your professional, that's keeping that boundary for yourself. We can't get caught up in someone else's mental health issues. And that is that's that self-care piece too. We can't get caught up in something, okay? My dean will send me a letter of support for a student, which states that I need to extend all deadlines for the student. How can I extend deadlines for a student and keep this fair for all our students? Great question. So at my university, we have the power to extend deadlines based on our discretion. You need to speak to your student services about that. It's not, I think what we're getting at is a possible equity issue, right? But when students have medical or mental health situations, that's the flexibility of our ability to work with students on an individual basis. Okay, students are not a sea of all the same person. They are 20 to 30 different human beings with different experiences, different needs, different wants, different outside situations. So we have the power, according to your university, check with them, of course. I know I have the power and the flexibility to take a little more control and to be flexible with students when they need that. So if you're concerned about it, tell your dean, hey, I have concerns with providing one student a deadline. Do we have any type of documentation that I can keep so that I know why the student needs that extension? What is the best way to approach a situation where a student shares that you and they have attempted suicide and shows where they've made the attempt? Great question. This would be a great example of saying, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that you trust me to share this with me. I would like to warm hand you off into the proper facility or the proper person here at the university who can provide the support. I am not clinically able to provide you any support in this. This is outside of my scope of practice, but I do appreciate that you trust me with that. That means a lot. And that shows that you've grown quite a bit by talking about this. But I would like to connect you to someone who can provide more stable or stronger clinical support, even if it's just maintenance support. All right, how do we approach cultural stigmas on dealing with mental health? This right here, talking about it. Talk about it. Talk about it with your students. Talk about it with your faculty. Talk about it with your family and your friends. Don't make it a taboo topic. People get so scared around it and you see them shrink away. Don't be the loud person in the room about mental health. Yell it from the rooftops. We need to make this a less of a taboo topic so that people aren't scared to share about it. Okay. And that's where we create an environment where someone who is struggling or dealing with it feels comfortable talking about it as well, if everyone else is already talking about it. Okay. I always find that sharing stories provides concrete examples of the content, as we are also complex and psychological disorders look much different in the real world, absolutely, compared to textbook content. I don't use personal stories, but use real world examples. How do we know the line between real world stories and horror stories or scare tactics? Great question. When you these are case studies, right? We have, fictional or make-believe case studies or anonymous case studies. If the end of the case study is telling someone else what to do or what not to do because of this, if there is a gruesome or something at the end that someone goes, oh God, that's not education. That's a scare tactic. Okay. We want to be educating people on things. And there are some terrible things that absolutely can happen. That's part of mental health, right? But there's a line of reality versus we're just sharing terrible facts or terrible stories that have no educational value. So you want to make sure the story has educational value, while also respecting the population of people that you're currently working with. Okay. These are students, remember, right? This is not a mental health clinic. So our stories should be, I don't want to say light, that's not what I'm saying, but we should not be going into the depth of someone who's in a mental health clinic and those type of stories. Campus resources can sometimes be overwhelmed if there is a campus-wide issue, like a student's death. Absolutely. What should we tell a student if they tell us they couldn't get into an appointment after wait so long? Great question. Okay, here we go. Employee assistance programs called an EAP. A lot of companies have EAPs. If a student has a parent that works for a company, has an uncle or a grandparent or a sister who works for a company that has an EAP, they can use that EAP counseling resources. Okay. So if your student is unable to get counseling or doesn't know where to start, tell them, hey, do you have a family member who works for a company that has an HR, a human resources? Can you call that HR and ask them, do you provide an employee assistance program, an EAP? Very often, EAPs not only could provide free counseling for short-term counseling issues, but they can also connect you to a proper counselor in your area who accepts your insurance. It is a wonderful resource that so many people don't know about, okay? And I, I actually was a counselor for a global EAP for a couple of years. It was a fabulous experience. So I'd have, you know, a John Doe called me and said, hey, so my brother's wife works for this company. Can I get some help? Absolutely. You're part of the family. That's how that works. There's no harm in reaching out and calling the HR and asking them for that. Okay. Is asking for documentation, like the extended deadlines example, or following up with the student to see if they connected with resource, not a confidentiality issue, not if they brought it to you first. Okay. If they said, hey, I have a medical issue, I need an extension on my assignment, you ask for, can I have a doctor's note saying this? The doctor's note does not have to have your diagnosis or treatment or anything of that nature, but I need some type of documentation to support why I'm giving you an extension and not everyone else in the class. Okay. So explain to them, you're not looking for a diagnosis or treatment. You're just looking for a note from a doctor that says this student was unable to attend this class on this day or unable to finish the paper on these days. That's it. Keep it super simple. Okay. Or following, this is why I said following up with them about connecting the resources. If they come to you asking about resources, they've opened that door. You're fine with that. If your school gives you the student's phone number and email for communication purposes, there's no confidentiality issue in that, okay? They've already provided you with that information. If you call their phone and you get someone that's not them, you should not be discussing anything with that person, as we shouldn't about grades either, right? The same rules apply. So you want to keep those same confidentiality rules that your university or your college already instills about grades or their attendance and things of that nature. So what's the difference between providing therapy versus education versus counseling? Excellent question. Therapy and counseling, pretty much the same thing. Okay. A clinician can go into depth on the difference of those, but for the sake of a professor or someone in higher education, it's the same thing. That is where we get deep. That is where we ask tough questions. That's where I challenge a client onto identifying what they're struggling with underneath. There's types of motivational interviewing or CBT therapy. Those are for people who are trained in those type of therapeutic or counseling techniques. Education is sharing facts, sharing information that you find in research or online, trusted online resources, of course. We're not looking for, Joe Schmo's mental health wellness page. We're looking at the Mayo Clinic. We're looking at Mahaney's Mental Health Association for New York State or whatever state that you live in, obviously. We can absolutely educate our students on the signs, the symptoms, and then possible coping skills that they can try to work with and help. It's a great question, because that can be, for someone that's not in the clinical field, it can be a little daunting of, well, when am I educating and when am I counseling? I don't know how to counsel, so I don't want to do that. So stick to it, you're sharing information. And for those of us who are active in the mental health, field and want to talk about it, it seems like second nature to us, because we look at and we research these things all the time. Students aren't doing that. So the education that you have from your research, share that with your students. Okay. Tell them where to look for this stuff. Tell them what you're seeing in your student population. Say, hey, I see a lot of students struggle around midterms week because they're stressed out. Who here feels stressed out around midterms week? And they're all going to raise their hand. You just made a huge connection to that class, that they are not alone in feeling stressed out during midterms week. Those little things can go a really, really long way. Let me see. There are so many wonderful things here. You guys are, I appreciate this so much, but let me see what, I know I've missed so many. Let me see what I've, how do we approach cultural stigmas on dealing with mental health? Great question. This is a difficult question, right? Because we don't know all cultures and how different cultures work with mental health. We only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. Asking questions. This is how we know more, as we ask questions. If you have a student who's coming to you saying, hey, I'm having this issue, but my parents don't really understand because in my culture, you don't talk about it, which is very popular in many different cultures. You are supporting that student, okay? So you can share the information, share the resources, warm hand them off to the counseling center. That's all you can do, though. And I know we want to do more, and you're here because you want to do all you can do, but also we have to have those proper boundaries, okay? And then ask them a question on it. Any advice on how to deal with students who take advantage of the generous assignment delays or such? That's going to be what works best for you. If you are finding students are taking advantage, then maybe we need to reel it in a little bit more, right? And I know you want to provide those extensions and those flexible due dates. But if it's not turning out to the way that you need it to be for your grading, so that you're grading everything on time, we need to adjust our practice to, again, support ourselves first. Self-care always has to come first. You cannot be grading 27 final papers, midterm papers, week 1 papers, discussion posts, all in the last 2 days of the term because everyone waited for the last 2 days of the term to submit everything, right? That's not good for your mental health. Your mental health has to come first, always. Because if you're not there, you can't teach them their content. And you're not going to be the best professor you can be. So you have to make sure you create a learning environment that you are the best instructor you can be to then support all the students the best that you can. Okay, tips on tutoring students on some math and English when they have other challenges that are distracting to them and to the tutors. This is, again, where that disability accommodations office comes into play, okay? Talk to them, work with them. They might have some tips. They might have an expert on working with someone that has distraction issues or challenges to bring them in that tutoring process. So you may have an expert content, a mental health counselor who's able to support the student in that, and maybe you guys do it's kind of a three-way tutoring there, okay? But speak to your disability accommodations office. They have so many resources that we don't know anything about, but that's what they're there for. And again, you're here because you want to ask questions. Ask questions to the department at your university that are there to help just for that. Students appreciate the options. Oh, this is beautiful. Okay. I think I covered everything here. I think I have everything here. I want to thank you all so much for this wonderful interactive discussion. This was so fabulous. I appreciate this. The more we talk about it, the more we're breaking down that stigma. Okay. So don't be scared. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. And the people who don't want to hear it, talk about it more with them because they're the ones who need to hear it. This is how we break down stigma. This is where we create communities and environments that are supportive of each other so the people who need the help feel comfortable reaching out to get said help.
Thank you, Cailyn. And that looks like all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for this impactful webinar, and thank you all for attending today. We will be emailing you a link to view the recording of this webinar once it's available. To check out our other upcoming mental health centered webinars and curated resources for education, please visit our website, which I'm going to go ahead and link in the chat now. Also, if you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, which I've also linked in the chat. These free webinars are brought to you by Hawks Learning, an innovative educational courseware company. To learn more about our mastery-based course materials and how Hawks can enhance learning outcomes for you and your students, please visit hawkslearning.com, and I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.